Jahan Dotson is being considered a legit weapon in Washington, but does that really matter to us? And can we really take that for more than a grain of salt? That and more today on the Dynasty Newsletter. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, joined by my co-host, Chris Allen. Chris, Jahan Dotson drafted in the first round, a little bit higher than a lot of us thought he'd probably be drafted. Thought he'd be around Christian Watson, George Pickens there in the second round. What do you think about hearing he's coming into camp hot, being considered a legit weapon by Commanders beat writer Zach Selby?
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me too much just because we are looking for, let's say, at least let's say, number two, three ish option in the Commanders offense. And this is actually the perfect format to have this conversation because we know that the 2022 version of the Commanders offense is not going to be what we expect for the long term. Like, there's no way that Carson Wentz figures into their long-term plans like as a franchise. Heck, we don't like apparently according to what's going on right now at the federal court level, we don't even know who's going to be the owner like in 2023, like
Fair.
with the way things are going right now. So I think the number two, number three option of the offense is fairly lucrative just because we know that this is the type of offense that's going to be at or above like the league average in terms of neutral passing. And if it's anybody else behind like at least a well-established wide receiver one like Terry McLaurin, we know that they can be at least conducive to having like solid like wide receiver two type numbers. I mean, heck, for as long as we've been pining over guys like Curtis Samuel to actually hit in that offense, and even the other, even the ancillary players in the offense that have had like decent stretches of productivity, whether it's been Logan Thomas or heck, shoot, like people are trying to shoehorn JD McKissick into a number of their drafts because they know that that passing offense can be at least productive from a fantasy standpoint. So I'm liking the fact that there's now like the guy like Jahan Dotson, who, like you said beforehand, like I didn't think he was going to be drafted as high, but with the number of wide receivers that were in this class, we figured he was going to be a part of that run that was going to happen as a part of like day two, like, at least
Right,
whether it's
right.
going to be like, the second, third round or wherever the case may be. So I get it. I get why folks are excited about it because he has the draft capital behind him that at least insinuates that there's going to be some level of commitment, like from the team at the beginning of his career, which is what you want for wide receivers. And then afterwards, it's just where does he fit in this offense? Like, is he going to be excited enough? Like, is the excitement going to build enough that he's going to get, I don't know, maybe outshine like a guy that might have already worn out his welcome in Curtis Samuel, who's actually, I believe, according to OTC, his contract, I mean, they could get out of it next year. And so if
Mm-hmm.
the team wants to look at trying to move on, save some cap space, and actually move this franchise forward, then Dotson would be well positioned if he actually winds up having a productive like rookie season and then moves on into like 2023 2024 like with like a productive rookie season like by itself. So yeah, I'm liking where I'm going right now. I don't know like I don't know if I'm really there yet from a redraft standpoint, but at least from a dynasty perspective, this is exactly what we want to hear right now in an offense that is somewhat ambiguous when it comes to looking at all of their passing options.
And a lot of times people don't want to put a lot of stock into what you hear from team beat writers at this point in the season. At at that, I'll argue it's far better for the beat writer to be negative towards the rookie wide receiver than positive. Think about Treylon Burks, who we're going to talk about next, and how much we've seen him in the national news because of his asthma, things like that, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to how small the reach is for something like a positive beat on Jahan Dotson being a legit weapon. And that's why you subscribe to things like the Footballguys newsletter so that you get tidbits like that aren't making the national news. So, yes, it is still June, but for the team beat writers to be putting out puff pieces for their rookies, a la Elijah Moore. And a good point on Elijah Moore is that he's in the New York market. So he got about 3 times the coverage on every great play he made. But um, Jahan Dotson getting positive buzz is definitely a good sign. It's not nothing, as the kids say. So I would say that I'm a little excited about Jahan Dotson, but the problem for immediate success is that Logan Thomas is in week one. Curtis Samuel is apparently looking very good, which I don't know if it was the same beat reporter, but that was just a report out of camp for the Commanders last week. So there is going to be some competition. It's easier for him to shine right now in camp without legitimate veteran competition. I've seen clips of McKissick looking good as well. I don't know how much that affects Jahan Dotson. Either way, the team situation could be a little brighter going forward. I wholeheartedly believe that Dan Snyder being gone would be a huge boost to the organization. Get almost anybody else in there, to be honest with you. But also, Terry McLaurin's contract is not getting done now.
Hmm.
It might get done before the season, but it's not getting done currently. We read a report last week that it was not close. After 2 weeks ago, we read a report that it was very close. So I guess we're going to stick with the most recent report and that it's not close. And if Terry McLaurin moves on, then we've got Jahan Dotson as a legitimate wide receiver one, and he's going at the back half of the first round in Superflex rookie drafts. Heck, I guess you can just say regular rookie drafts this year since we hardly have any quarterbacks to consider.
Right.
Weird year. So Jahan Dotson's going in the back half of the first. He's going behind sometimes Pickens, sometimes Sky Moore, sometimes even Christian Watkins. And those are all second round guys. So getting a first round wide receiver who could be a legitimate wide receiver one next year. How well will he do with the opportunity? How well will Carson Wentz do there? You don't know, but he is coming at a decent price point if you want to buy in early on the legit weapon that is Jahan Dotson. But we're going to go over to some other media coverage of a wide receiver that tends to be a little bit more negative recently. So Treylon Burks struggled with asthma early in this offseason. Didn't seem like he was exactly in shape or ready for NFL competition, and has been unavailable for the last two organized team activities. So I'm asking you, is this the type of situation like Kadarius Toney or like Jamar Chase, where
Yeah.
you look at this and say, you know what, I'm just going to close my ears and keep drafting the guy because his price is going to go down and it could be nothing?
Yeah, and I think that's likely the scenario that at least that's the way that this scenario plays out is that with a receiver that was one drafted in the first round, drafted as the replacement to one of at least a Pro Bowl, like all no, AJ Brown hasn't been all pro. So either way, like let's say
Pro
a
Bowl.
talented like wide receiver, like an alpha wide receiver, like in the NFL at this point, not just in real life, but fantasy as well. So the expectations are high. So you would think that these types of pieces, like his uh, inability to stay healthy, at least at this point, those are the things we're going to hear about. We're going to hear the good and the bad. And so the at least my thought process would be that there's going to be as much positive coverage as there's going to be negative coverage. And right now, during this point of the offseason, this is probably what you're going to get. So there are, I can, and the concerns are valid, right? Like we just talked about, the draft capital spent in order to acquire him, the situation that he lands in with a team, with the way that this team is constructed right now. This is essentially them saying that we still think that we have a window of opportunity in order to win with this roster as it's currently constructed, even though they are significantly top heavy between the Derrick Henry contract, two or three
Mm-hmm.
defenders that they currently have. I mean, it's hard to see, especially Ryan Tannehill's contract as well. I mean, this is their probably their final shot before they really get into Derrick Henry breaking the age model with where he's at in his career, and then the rest of the team and their roster construction as it stands. So Treylon Burks, like they need that he's a critical piece to this plan. There's just really no two ways about it. But can he fit into that role? And I think we've talked about this beforehand. Matt Harmon's charting on reception perception, looking at the early comparisons between AJ Brown and Treylon Burks. Not a solid comparison between the two. It's just not, they don't
And it
play the
doesn't
same
really
way.
need to be either. That's not us. I
Right.
guess what should I say? More casual. I guess
Yeah.
more casual viewers think because the pick that was acquired for AJ Brown went to Treylon Burks. That was the
Yeah.
one for one. But we talked about on the show when it happened. No one from the Titans said that they were replacing AJ Brown with them. They just happened to trade a receiver and draft a receiver, and it just so happens that Treylon Burks is the same height and jacked. So
Yeah.
everyone naturally went to that. But the
But if you
Titans
look at their
don't have
game,
to.
it's not the
It's
same.
not right. It's not the same, and smart people never really said it's the same, in my opinion.
I think it was just a storyline that a lot of folks wanted to think like, oh yes, like they can play the same way because they have the same physical traits, but the way their on-field deployment, on-field traits are not the same, and that's the most important
Yeah.
part. Because if you look at the way that the Titans actually can like try and win, like from a passing standpoint, their offensive line they've got some problems on their offensive line at this point. So if you're thinking that they're going to try and win with the same way that AJ Brown played, where AJ Brown can win not just on the interior, but for the most part, intermediate deep routes, like he can play that bully ball and play that X like type wide receiver. They don't have that same luxury this time around with the problems that they have on their offensive line. They just lost Roger Saffold. I mean, they're not going to be able to play the same way. And look at the receiver that they brought in alongside Treylon Burks, Robert Woods. Aha. So there's a way that they can still be productive and efficient on offense, especially with a guy like Ryan Tannehill,
Sure.
who made his hay throwing to, let's say, a relatively low ADOT guy in Jarvis Landry for however many years. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
this offense can evolve into a way that it's more productive, and Treylon Burks can be a part of it. So he might not win the way that we would expect him to, or at least some folks expect him to, because they want to say that it's a 1-to-1 comparison between him and AJ Brown. No, no, no. But I think the hope is that one, he gets on the field. Two, he establishes that rapport with Ryan Tannehill, which I would expect us to hear once we get into minicamp. How quickly do you think once they get into minicamp we're going to get? I mean, just slow motion pass after slow motion pass of Ryan Tannehill to Treylon Burks. I mean, just
Yeah,
the
no
same way that
shirt.
yeah, no shirt, and also, I mean, the same way that Miami's been doing all this Tua to Tyreek Hill propaganda.
Right,
We're gonna get
right.
the same thing, like from Tannehill to Treylon Burks once they get into the camp. So no, I'm not worried right now. I think we've done it. We've seen it time and time again for these like the receivers with the highest draft capital, whether it was Jamar Chase last year with the can't see because of the stripes, dropping the ball, not beating his own teammates in press coverage, and then look what happened. I'm not saying Treylon Burks is going to have a Jamar Chase like type season, but we've seen that type of coverage before, and we've seen these types of players that we know are talented come out and balling out. So while it might take a little while for him to ramp up, because we saw the same thing happen to AJ Brown in his rookie season, I still think that Treylon Burks can be productive in his first year. So no, I ain't worried.
Well, the conundrum that I have with Treylon Burks is that when he was drafted to the Titans, I guess I kind of have to correct an earlier statement in that his narrative was more casual, like ESPN viewer based, because it did kind of seep into his dynasty value too a little bit, because
Yeah.
he started getting drafted like 102. And I held on to Treylon Burks as my wide receiver one as long as I possibly could. But at the end of the day, it just became evident to me that Garrett Wilson and Jameson Williams ended up being a little bit higher than him. And then Drake London ended up getting that great draft capital. So then kind of just pushed Treylon Burks down to 4 for me. So right now in this video, I would like to be advising for people to try to capitalize on the negative attention for Treylon Burks. However, he's probably priced reasonably now, considering that when he was drafted, his price was elevated to what I believe to be an undeserved level. Like I always would have rathered Garrett Wilson, even with the injury. I always would have rathered Jameson Williams.
Mm-hmm.
Drake London and Treylon Burks has been like really back and forth for me. And then now I'd really like to say, look, go ahead and buy Treylon Burks, because you saw it even with Kadarius Toney. I remember when we were talking about how much we not despise Kadarius Toney as the person, but despised him as like should not have been a first round pick, had so many holes in
Yeah.
his games,
Yeah.
etc. But it even got to the point with Kadarius Toney slander when we were like, man, we still want Amon Ra, the 4th-round pick ahead of him, but I don't know, man. I might start having to take Kadarius Toney, and that was before the season even started because of all the slander for him.
Mm-hmm.
So off-season slander has not it's not getting dubs. Off-season slander is taking L's over the past few years. So I guess to the point of what do we want to see from Treylon Burks is I'd kind of like to see him use sort of like prime slant boy Michael Thomas, in that we want to see him getting going early, and we want to see him getting going in space, even across the middle, because he's got the toughness to deal with that kind of physicality. And I don't know that Robert Woods needs to be doing all the dirty work that he was doing for the Rams, which he excelled at. I mean, for Robert Woods' size, he does not get enough credit for how essential he was to the Rams offense. And there was no way
Oh
that
yeah.
Odell Beckham was coming in and being that physical. And that's not even a slight to Odell Beckham, who I believe has done a decent job, considering he's always been the star guy, um,
Mm-hmm.
mixing it up a little bit last year. But no one did it like Robert Woods. And I don't necessarily feel like Robert Woods needs to be coming in off injury at his age and trying to mix it up like that when Treylon Burks is perfectly capable. So I'd really like to see a very physical rookie season out of Treylon Burks. Let him do the things that he excelled at in college, which is just getting in space, getting the ball in easy situations, and then making plays. I would prefer to see that. And then in year 2, if Robert Woods moves on or takes a step back, then we could see Treylon Burks really flourish. So it's not going to be a lot of the AJ Brown stuff. You're not going to see much deep posts, anything like that, I don't think. So that's going to move us over to the Seahawks for the rest of the show because we have a good bit of things to talk about. We addressed the Rashad Penny situation a few weeks ago in that he already had a hamstring injury. Super unfortunate for a guy who I was really a big fan of when he came out. And he looked incredible last year. There were a lot of I told you so's going around, but then he already injured his hamstring this year. So it was Kenneth Walker to the moon. Well, unfortunately, Kenneth Walker also dealing with a hamstring injury that is apparently healed now, but man, that stuff just soft tissue in June really comes to bite you in October. I feel like you forget it happened, and it's like, wait a second, this guy's had a groin, this guy's had a calf. I forgot about that hamstring in June. So you get a lot of those secondary injuries. So now we have to look at the roster and say, well, who's going to get a lot of touches in camp? Chris Carson. Also, unfortunately, I feel like Chris Carson might never play again. If you saw the X-ray, pure speculation, not a doctor. Say it every show, but guy's got four screws in his spine.
Yeah,
a plate and 4 screws in his neck, and still trying to play football. So we got to look at a few guys. Travis Homer, DJ Dallas. You have any advice on people, one or the other, or just take whoever's on the waiver wire, or take any of them?
at this point, I'd take one of them because, like we've talked about a number of times on the show, having any of those back end of the roster like type running backs that at least we're not going to get the same archetype as like a Khalil Herbert 2021 type situation because neither of those guys really fit into that role. Because even in the starts, like we've seen DJ Dallas have at least, let's say, an RB2 role like on his own team, which has never really amounted to a ton. Now, could that change because they weren't involving him in the passing game, which was essentially like his calling card coming out of college? Probably not, because that was the rush show and now things are changing. That offense is changing. So it's possible that they try and involve them as much as possible, and it would make some sense for them to do so. But I think the big point is, from a dynasty standpoint, those are the types of players that you want at the back end of your roster. Like, not necessarily, you're not going to get the age bump, or you're not going to get the youth bump by infusing your roster or back end of your roster with those types of players, but at least the upside of trying to have a player on that you would pick up off the waiver wire that can turn into somebody that's worth more than anybody else that you find there out on the wire at this point. So I think that's the strategy, or that's the move that you should be trying to make, because try and find another running back that could be in line for at least a significant amount of touches over the course of the season, and especially when you might need it the most, a player that you can plug in as an RB2, like should you need one, because you're stuck with bye weeks or injuries or whatever the case may be. So if all of these guys you can start to talk yourself into having to use them, because we don't know what Kenneth Walker is going to be, for as much hype as in praise as he's been given, and rightfully so. We don't know what Rashad Penny's health is going to look like over a 17 game season. Having any one of those guys in the back in your roster right now, and I think trying to dive into the, I don't know, statistics and analysis like behind each of their games is kind of pointless at this point, because you're talking about them playing
Right.
with a quarterback that's not there anymore, and in a system that they're not going to implement anymore, most
Right.
likely. So I think, just again, from a strategic standpoint, having any of those guys on your roster is good, just because we know that the touches are most likely going to be coming, and that's better to have them on your roster versus just leaving them out there for any one of your other league mates to have.
And Pete Carroll is already talking about the hot hand, and it's just June.
Yeah,
It's his thing every year. It's just I'll
yeah.
just always go with the hot hand, and every year it ends up just being the hand. Whatever
Yeah.
hand is available is who Pete Carroll's going with, because he never has the opportunity to go with the hot hand. He never has two quality running backs healthy. Rashad Penny was healthy when Chris Carson was not. So he's always had solid running backs, and they've never been healthy at the same time. So we have no idea who would receive any usage. What you're really looking for between Travis Homer and DJ Dallas is who can you get 6 games out of.
Hmm.
DJ Dallas is really like the only one who gets involvement without injuries. Like, even if Rashad Penny's healthy, DJ Dallas is a little involved. Chris Carson was healthy. DJ Dallas was a little bit involved. So DJ Dallas potentially is the RB2 all year, depending on how these injuries line up. I mean, I would bet my life savings that both Kenneth Walker and Rashad Penny are not going to play all 17 games. So that being said, that means that DJ Dallas gets at least a few games as the RB2,
Hmm.
potentially a few, maybe 6 or 7 games as the RB1, depending on what part of the season is, if it's too far past the trade deadline, if they can't add David Johnson, something like that.
Hmm.
That's what you're looking for right now when you've got guys on the back of your roster like um, I there's teams that have Jimmy Graham out there that's a free agent. It's probably done playing football. It's like, just drop Jimmy Graham.
Hmm.
Don't worry about the touchdowns he might catch if he does sign somewhere, and add guys that might get 6 games that you're looking towards the future for. Jarek McKinnon's another one.
Hmm.
When Rojo has never proven to be able to handle a full workload and has barely proven to handle any at all. Yes, he's had explosive runs. Not going to argue with people about that. But when has anybody been comfortable with Ronald Jones carrying the workloads? CEH has proven to be, gosh, what is CEH? I mean, he should be a quality receiving back at the very least. He should
Sure.
be JD McKissick plus plus, but we
Hmm.
haven't even seen him utilized in the passing game, which is why Patrick Mahomes said, go ahead and draft him, in the fable tale of Patrick Mahomes saying, our team's so good, let's just go ahead and grab a running back in the first round, or whatever happened
Right.
there.
Yeah.
Not even passing the dude the ball. So I don't know what to say about CH. What I do know is that your boy, Jarek McKinnon, was getting a heck of a lot of run when the games mattered last year. So, he's kind of the one for one replacement for Damian Williams 2 years ago. And then the one for one replacement for Daryl Williams last year. And that they're the backups, quote unquote, but they end up seeing the important touches when the time comes. So those are the types of guys. Just look at running back situations that are super shaky, and if they're sitting on the waiver wire, drop some of those vets that really are never going to do anything for you, and see if you can get six games out of a guy.
Hmm.
Last thing we're going to talk about is our tight end, Noah Fant. Big fan. We've been drafting the heck out of him in best ball. Noah Fant has gotten glowing reviews from Pete Carroll, and he's very, very cheap in Dynasty. So before we get out of here, what is your take on Noah Fant in Dynasty at his current value?
Honestly, at his current value, he should be a guy that you're trying to target in trades because, again, this is an offense that, of course, we think like traditionally has evolved or revolved around like the two primary targets in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And there hasn't even been like a really a resurgence in the tight end position. Like, think about the guys they've tried to incorporate like over the past like few years, whether it was like Will Disley or who is it, Luke Wilson. I mean, they've had guys on their roster that they've
Yeah,
been able
not
to
first
select,
round picks.
not
Yeah.
first round picks, but guys that have been useful in the passing game, guys that have actually been efficient in the passing game. And just nothing's ever come to fruition because it has been the Russ show. So now, if there is some level of ambiguity like within that offense, and if there actually could now become an offense that is a bit more spread out and not as concentrated between those two wide receivers, and now we actually have an athletic tight end with at least draft capital from a different franchise, albeit, that can now start to at least provide some efficiency like at that position, heck yeah, we should be targeting that guy because we know where that athleticism and what that receiving efficiency can be from his time in Denver. And that's with even worse quarterback play, to be quite honest. So, I mean, I do think that Fant is a guy that I think is undervalued at this point just because of the uncertainty coming with his position and also with his situation right now. So I get it. But at least from what we've seen beforehand, at least I'd have some surety in trying to trade for him at this point versus just kind of waiting a year to figure it out. Because if you do that and he
Yeah, it's
winds up
too
having a
late.
productive season, it's too late. So
No
now's the time to
chance.
actually buy in. So what more information do you need other than to say that this is a productive player, has been in the past, and regardless of situation, the expectation would be that it'll improve, because if you're not going to invest in a tight end, or not tight end, quarterback this season, we can at least expect them to try and look at the position for next year as too. So I'm all in on at least trying to at least look at trading for him at this point.
I could do an hour show on Noah Fant. I guess I'm just going to break it down as quick as I can and say that he's 24-year-old, extremely athletic, mid first round pick, actually more better than mid first round pick just a few years ago. Came out at the same time as his teammate TJ Hawkinson. He played injured last year with Drew Lock, still had some decent games, had terrible injury luck, and now he's going to a team where he's the third best option by a mile. D. Eskridge isn't going to be anything because they've just brought in Marquise Goodwin, who is like an exact clone of D. Eskridge, and they would never bring in a veteran that's the exact clone of their sophomore if they felt any positive remarks for D. Eskridge. So that
Yeah.
means that third best option in the offense is Noah Fant by a mile, even if Kenneth Walker does catch as good as some of the people say that he's going to be able to, even though he didn't really do it in college. I hope they're right, because I have a ton of Kenneth Walker on my rosters. It's going to be tough for him to be the third best option over Noah Fant. So I don't usually give like really firm, concrete advice like this on the show, but go get Noah Fant. Just want to tell you that now, because I want to be able to say I told you so specifically on Noah Fant going forward. It just makes so much sense to me. His value makes absolutely no sense to me. It makes so much sense to just pay what you have to pay for the guy right now, especially in tight end premium. And you could potentially get an elite tight end. And even if you don't, you still get Hunter Henry production, which
Mm-hmm.
we're perfectly happy with. So worst case scenario, you get your value out of them. Best case scenario, you get an elite tight end who's just had a rough go of it in some rough offenses. So that's going to do it for today. Make sure that you go check us out on our own feed on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of those different places that you watch your listen to your shows, and then just watch us on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, all that stuff helps us out, and we will catch y'all next week.
Peace.